I'm really excited about today's conversation. On this episode, we have invited Kate Sullivan. She's an Emmy Award journalist, TV host, producer, and her background is fascinating. She has covered news from 9/11, presidential elections, but lately she is producing and hosting what's called The Dine For, which is a unique show on PBS, also available on Amazon Prime. She has a unique ability to connect with the audience.
Everybody has a why.
Everybody has a why.
If you're gonna tell stories, you might as well tell the big ones,
Right.
The ones that have the opportunity to be the most inspiring.
That's what has made her a very respected media personality. So I'm very honored to have her today on our podcast, and I hope you guys make the most out of this conversation. First of all, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. As I mentioned before, quite of a career, quite of a woman, quite the energy. So with all that, what exactly drew you to a career in journalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here. For me, it was as I went through college and as I tried to determine what I wanted to do. I really thought I was going to be a lawyer when I was at university. And my senior year of college, I said to myself, what am I doing? I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't even like to argue. Why would I even apply to law school? And at that point I had gotten in and had even, put in my deposit. So that was my path. And I sort of had a pivotal moment senior year where I said, this is crazy. I went down to the local TV station where I had been interning. And I said to the news director, I said, I'd really love to work for you in any capacity if you'll have me. And the news director said, you're crazy, go to law school, don't join us journalists. And I said, no, really, I'd love to do this. And she ended up hiring me. And I will tell you, it turned out to be the exact right path for me. It turned out to be exactly what I feel like was the intersection of what I love, what I'm interested in, and what I eventually became good at. I certainly was not good at the beginning. And I always say that to people. I said, it's okay to suck. It's okay to really not be good at the beginning because it takes a while. But if you have the interest and you have the passion, then it'll make a difference. But the reason why I got into journalism is I love telling stories. I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by what makes them tick. And to me, it doesn't feel like work. And I think when you can be in a position where it doesn't feel like work, that's a good place to be.
Yeah, recently, actually, I touched on that subject that when you're on the right path, it does not feel like working. What for others will look like work. So, there are many people out there, journalists that have a calling, but do not all of them really won an Emmy Award. So, I mean, there must be something about you when you jump in a conversation. So as a journalist, right, it's all about getting the truth out of conversations. Mm-hmm. How do you see the person that sits on the opposite side for getting into, this deep mode that will spark, right, the sincerity of somebody? How you navigate that?
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated answer, but I'll try to tackle it. The current venture that I do now, which is a television series on PBS called To Dine For, where I interview creatives and business CEOs and visionaries at their favorite restaurant, is a real departure from what I used to do, which was a day-to-day general assignment reporter and anchor of the daily news. I anchored the morning news in New York at WCBS, and then I anchored the evening news in Chicago at WBBM. And I did that for a solid 10-year span of both those cities. And it was fascinating and really interesting and hard, everything rolled into one. What I'm doing now is very different. And what I'm doing now is I sit down with someone at their favorite restaurant to hear their story. So right away, there's a different tone, there's a different energy. I am there to showcase what they have created. Every guest on to Dine For has brought an idea to life through their own imagination, heart, and hustle. And I hear their story from the table or the booth or the banquette of a place they love. So just by going to someone's favorite restaurant, I believe people come alive, right? Anna, if you and I were in Barcelona and you said, I said, Anna, where are we going? Where are we going? Take me somewhere wonderful in Barcelona. And we went to your favorite tapas restaurant and we sat down, we had some sangria, we're sitting down with some small plates. I would learn so much more about you than in any other setting. So already the setting of the conversation makes a difference. Secondly, I think what I uniquely bring to a conversation is insatiable curiosity, deep paired with a deep interest, and I really care. I really care about someone's journey, and not just the semantics of what happened to their career or how it happened, but also why. Why did it happen that way? Because very often when we look back at our lives, these emotional forces that propel us in different directions are really the interesting stuff that doesn't get talked about. The anger we feel towards something, or the agitation or the frustration, that is what really motivates us in some of the really hard lessons of life. But we don't necessarily either feel comfortable talking about it, or maybe don't even really know it ourselves. We go through life and we are pulled by all these emotions that we're not even always conscious of. So for me, a great conversation is when I can start to unpeel that and unpeel it and reveal it to the viewer, and also maybe to the guest. Maybe the guest has a moment where like, wow, I can't believe I'm saying this. I didn't even know this about myself. Like, that to me is a really good interview.
Interesting, because one thing is like, you and I sitting over for a nice dinner, which I hope I have the actually chance to take you. I already have a few places in mind.
Oh, I can't wait.
And then like another level is when you feel that you have certain responsibility for the audience that is following you, right? So do you speak on behalf of that audience, or you're trying to have a very sincere human conversation? Because the audience sometimes pushes you to, dive into areas that, perhaps you personally are not necessarily that interested, but you're kind of like embody all that, those people that, follow you, and you speak for them. How that kind of gets together with the real Kate Sullivan?
I think I lean closer to, instead of speaking for the audience, I think I speak more for myself. And then the audience comes along with me. I think if I were to do the interview just for the audience, it would be a different interview. Do you know what I mean? I'll give you an example. I interviewed Lindsey Vonn, the great alpine skier, U.S. world champion, gold medalist, just a trailblazing, amazing athlete. And I was most interested in the psychology of success. How does someone get to be that fearless, to just throw themselves down a mountain and be that fast? And if you've seen Lindsey, she is a female phenom. She's stunningly gorgeous. She is fierce, but she's also a champion for women. So there's a lot of like storylines to unpack. Now, the obvious storyline from an audience perspective is the fact that she was married to Tiger Woods, the great golfer, okay? And all of the scandal that happened to Tiger and his golfing career. But you know what? I never asked that. And there's probably many audience members who'd be like, why didn't you ask that? That was the question. Why didn't you delve into that that element of the conversation? For me, it was immaterial that she dated Tiger Woods. To me, she and everything she represents stands on its own. And so for me, not asking about Tiger Woods spoke volumes to myself, that like, this woman is fascinating by herself. We don't need to bring in a man into the conversation to legitimize who she is and make her more interesting, if that makes sense. So that's an example of like, do you ask the questions for the audience or do you ask the questions based on your own curiosity? I think when you're innately curious about something, the audience comes along for the ride with you because your curiosity carries that. They want to know now too. But I can see it both ways, and I don't think that how I'm doing it is the right way. It's just the way that it's kind of how I approach it.
You've had so many conversations throughout your career that have deeply considered, like, success, and as you embed like this conversation you had. So what's your most biggest takeaways from all these conversations as where we're going? Technology right now is giving all these tools for everybody to have a voice and speak, and but not everybody sort of is prepared for it or has that talent. And considering that, like, throughout this massive list of important people that you sat down with, of course, like, your brain sits on another level than anybody because everybody lives in their own world, but you got to visit all of those. So what are your biggest takeaways from all these conversations you've had?
Well, you have what you just said made me think of three different things. So I'm going to start with the first thing I thought of, which is, in this age of social media, in this age of branding ourselves and telling our stories, the skill of storytelling is completely underrated. The ability to tell great stories, whether you're doing what I do on TV, doing what you do, Anna, in business, whether you are a school teacher, whatever you do, being able to tell a compelling story is such an underrated skill. And I would urge anyone to work a little bit on getting better at it, because when you can tell a great story, you engender trust, you engender likability, you engender empathy, connection, compassion. And people understand you. I would say this is the age of telling your own story. And if you say, "Oh, I don't want to tell my story. That's not who I am," someone will tell it for you. In a vacuum, without speaking, people will make up their own story. So I would urge everyone to tell their story, to do it as plainly, as simply, as honestly as they can, because those are the key ingredients to a great story. Authenticity and simple. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be very simple, are the most powerful stories. So that's the first thought I had. And I think that gets a little bit to kind of culturally, where we are with social media and media is this ability and this need to tell our stories. But as far as like what I've gleaned from all the conversations, well, I'm currently working on, writing everything down and kind of compiling just a list of life lessons. I think when you get to interview and have the privilege, as I have, to interview so many creators and builders, there are through lines and there are commonalities among all of the stories. And, one of them is having vision, being able to see things other people can't. Another one of them, when you think about all of these people, is passion. They have to have extreme passion, like passion that you can feel when you talk to them, because passion is what gets other people on board and builds a team and makes people want to join the cause, so to speak. But also there is an ability to embrace failure. I think so often we try to avoid failure at all costs, but everyone I see across the board has used failure as a pivoting moment, as a chance to learn and get stronger and get better and to handle rejection. So those are just three things that I see across the board of all the conversations. And every story is different, but there are definite commonalities.
When on your first point, Kate, I remember I was at this conference, and it was all about protocol, social media, and Jack Dorsey was speaking. It was a very small conference in Costa Rica, and Jack Dorsey said, I always dreamed of a world that the option of deleting is not a thing. What if everybody comes truthful? Then we won't be judging so much because it's just there's no option for it, right? And and when you said this thing about what if everybody would tell their stories like sincerely, how would like just closing my eyes and in a sci-fi world like imagining and envisioning there's like an index where I can just like search for people's truthful stories because everybody's gonna give theirs. How would that look like, right, from the judgment perspective and everything?
Yes.
Because maybe precisely because of that, the people don't speak much about their stories. They don't think it's interesting. We're lacking empathy of navigating a world where everybody is unique on its own voice. So I love the idea that you invite everybody to do so because it's a very tough exercise. And
It is. And I think when people don't tell their stories, there's always something behind that, whether it's insecurity, whether it's not feeling special enough, not feeling like our story is worthy. These are all lies. These are all lies because every story is worthy. And I believe that to the depths of my soul. Every person is worthy and every story is worthy. And it's like, do you have the courage to share who you are?
Right. So the interesting thing for me is you've you had a brilliant career in journalism, yet today journalism is facing another era, right? With the creator economy, everybody has these tools, everybody can go in front of a camera and talk. How do you think the role of a journalist is going to change or is changing? And those that are aiming to become journalists should think of or adapt because mediums are different. And how do you envision that part?
I think the need for great journalists who really care about the truth has never been more important. Because anyone, as you said, can get in front of a camera and start talking, and they do, right? Like, hello, TikTok, right? But people have to remember that what they're consuming, whether it's Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, these are people who have no journalism background. So I think, the news outlets are having an inordinate amount of pressure to be able to differentiate themselves and distinguish themselves from all of that. And, I think the responsibility of a journalist has never been greater to do the work and to be transparent in the work. What I do with To Dine For is really a departure from day-to-day local journalism. It is, of course, telling stories of these visionary minds, but it is really creating an atmosphere and a tone and a mood that is very different from day-to-day journalism. But yet, I feel an incredible pressure to get it right, to get the facts of their journey correct, of what they accomplished and how they did it. And I think when you talk to people who are in this field of journalism, I think it is that pressure and that responsibility that buoys them, and that I don't want to use the word special, but they are special. It is unique, and it has to be. Journalists need to be telling a better story of why it's so important, right? It's I think essential to democracy, and it goes hand in hand with democracy.
So, like, what role do you see traditional media playing in the future of journalism? I mean, alongside the rise of independent creators.
Yeah, I think traditional media will always exist. I think it'll morph, it'll change. You're already seeing it dramatically across the board as more and more eyes go to streaming, as more and more eyes go to radio, to go to podcasts. But you also have to, I point to the numbers of some of the news podcasts that you can listen to. Those are some of the strongest podcasts out there. The podcast from the New York Times, the podcast from some of the journalists at ABC and CBS. Those are some of the highest rated podcasts out there. So I think that is very encouraging, that there is absolutely an appetite for good journalism. And I don't think it's just something that journalists talk about, the importance of journalism. I think people know that too. And I think there is a passionate audience for really good journalism. So, I don't have a crystal ball, Anna, so I don't really know, exactly what the split
Yeah,
is
I
going
know.
to be of traditional media. All I know is the great, great importance of it.
It's true that every time I consume media from these media companies, it has a certain style that I'm in sync with it. That my attention is different than when I have to engage with like some independent. And I'm not sure if they should embrace these techniques or those are secrets, but my way of navigating the story mentally while like is done professionally, it is clicking my brain very differently than
Mm.
and but it's true that like in the independent I found sometimes like a very wild creativity that the unexpected might hit around the corner, right? And it's not so formally designed, and somewhere being in between, it's a good thing to take in consideration. But definitely I think like there is independent creators that they can get better, way better, right? And shape their message because they have something to say, but they have been unseen by these big companies. And as you said, we don't have that crystal ball and we don't know yet. I do think like maybe it's side of a preference, right? For me, I consume both. And for example, conversations that I heard you doing, like it got me addicted. Like I went one after the other and another, and I'm hooked because I think, like as I said at the beginning of this podcast, you brought that Caesarean spark. It's over, a meal, which makes them very comfortable person, and it's you on your own that you have this very brilliant talent to make somebody feel that it's heard, it's listened, it's navigating that conversation. That's very unique. So it's less about the media companies and more about the journalist itself that has this gift.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. When you think of the best of mixing traditional media, sort of the old guard, with what's happening now, I think of the George Floyd murder. And
Mm,
I point to that example as one where the old and the new mixed together actually help tell the story better. If we didn't have people on the ground there with rolling on their cameras, seeing how long the officer was on George Floyd's neck and seeing the reaction of the crowd and hearing the cries and him crying out to his mother and being in that moment, the quote unquote citizen journalists who were there, they weren't citizen journalists, they were just people with a phone, but in that moment they became a citizen journalist because they were recording fact and they were taking us into that moment. Had they not been there, had that not gone viral, it would have been a completely different situation. And whether justice would have prevailed, whether we would have known the truth, whether we have seen the truth, what would have been told would have been very different. I think it's a great example of how so many people on social media, there's such negative talk of this mixing of the TikTokification of news. But that's a great singular example of how it benefited that story because the truth came to light. And I think you'll see that again and again with news events where people are there and they're adding so much to the understanding of the truth. And while
yeah.
there are negatives to that, there are also positives. And so I think
Mm.
traditional media has done a good job of harnessing some of that social media, you know, different perspectives to really fill in what is the truth.
It gives me goosebumps as you mentioned that case because it's hard to believe that such things happen. And like every time, like, so even nowadays when somebody wants to bring the truth through social media, like it's almost like you don't have stomach for it because your brain isn't capable to process that such
Right.
things can happen. It's like wait a minute, who have we become, right?
Right.
And that's a very hard question to answer, because if you can digest it, and yet it's happening, like how exactly there can be a reaction. I think with so much what's going on, we have developed a certain numbness at times through very, very shocking news. And that is a very dangerous audience, I think. So
Yes.
maybe like right now, more responsibility from like journalists expressing better is, it's definitely the audience, like taking in consideration what is being said. Like we're backing right now a lot of filmmakers that are bringing documentaries to express what's going on with the environmental situation. And you watch it, but it's nothing but a mere entertainment. You're getting and looking through somebody's eyes, an adventure, and you have a discussion tomorrow for over coffee with your friends, but it ends there. So how much this message transforms the audience, I think like that's something I would love to see in the future happening. That these people like yours, the voices that are trying to make you feel, motivate, restore, and whatever, how much it actually transforms into real impact, because the audience consumes it with an active pursuit of perceiving that is something like passionate to me. That's why, Kate, like right now I'm talking to you and telling you all this, because for me it's fascinating being in a conversation where you sit on the other side and I get to ask you questions, maybe not as professionally as you do, of course, by far,
Oh no,
but
stop. Stop, stop, stop. No, I'm enjoying this so much, and I know that, with the work that you're doing to really democratize how content creators can not only create their work but also make money from it. Is that pretty much what you're doing? Or I'd love to hear you kind of
yeah.
give your elevator pitch.
Yes, I will definitely at the end of this conversation, like I'll give you, because I would love to hear your inputs on it. And I think for like this podcast, because like it's quite of a thing, like even like in the team, they were like, oh, you're going to talk with Kate? Like, I got a question, I got this. I'm like, well, it's going to be a conversation. I'm not going to go like mechanically and, through questions at Kate. But, you've sat down with so many creators, entrepreneurs and everything. And yet you absorb their message. What is the thing that you would like to have to, like, if you can start tomorrow, like a show or something, what would be that subject you would like to cover the most? And what will be those conversations you would like to bring more to light, apart from the ones that you already did?
I think the new frontier for me that's so fascinating is health. Health and wellness. I think we are just beginning understanding a holistic look at health, not just from a standard of care traditional medicine, but also from a holistic what we eat, what we consume, what we see, our nervous system, how we exercise. I think that a more holistic picture of health. I think that subject matter to me is fascinating. And if I were to create a show, like create a new show, I would love for it to be in that realm, because I really feel like not only does it apply to every human, everywhere, it knows no boundaries or borders. I think we're just beginning to learn. And I think that there's so much fascinating storylines there that really have the potential to help people. In the US, people are really slaves to, their health insurance and what it covers, and a very small pocket of the ways to be well. And if they knew more, they might do more. And I think, the obesity epidemic in our country, and how small changes to their health could be radically change the rest of their lives. So for me, that's the most interesting. But as far as the specific, it's interesting because, like I came from a very generalist standpoint. I was a general assignment reporter. I covered every story. I was on the scene in tornadoes, and I was covering, wildfires, and I was covering triple shootings and murders and murder trials, and wonderful news and county fairs. I mean, I literally covered everything. And then with To Dine For on PBS, I cover a very specific story. And that is the idea that you can change your life through your own imagination. And by doing so, you can also change other people's. They are visionary people who've built things and created. And for me, I realized before I started the show that that's the story I wanted to tell, that very specific story. And so that's what I've done. And really, they're, even though they're vastly different stories from all walks of life, they have that in common. And so that's kind of the story. I'm kind of immersed in that kind of storytelling right now. But to answer your question, health is where I would want to go.
I think if you do that, Kate, it will be a great success because people respond very well to health content. Like it's almost like next day their habits start changing and they resonate. I know, like I watch Octopus My Teacher and I can't eat octopus. And I'm in Spain, like I have something.
That's
about,
hard
like,
to do in Barcelona because it's on
exactly.
every menu. Yes.
Exactly, and I blame him. I'm like, "What are you doing? This is an octopus. Don't you know these creatures like have?" And then you watch The Arrival, and you're like, "Oh, look, there's a connection there about the supreme intelligence." So it definitely, like when it comes to this type of subjects, people do respond. So if you think like that, considering. Maybe it's more of a responsibility, Kate, because if people's health it's staying one conversation away from you, like navigating that subject, then I really encourage you to consider it very seriously.
Thank you. I will. I mean, it's unless, this is the power of questions, right? You posed a question that I really hadn't thought about. And that gets me thinking, right? That's why asking questions is so incredible to ourselves and to other people. Because, like if I asked you that question, like what kind of content would you like to see, Anna? What would be your response?
I think definitely health will be in it. I'm like right now it sounds like, well, you cutting me off the off here, but like I think people that have like you mentioned before, like imagination, I think like having people forcing them to our conversations where they awaken that silent mind that they've not paid attention to it and gave up on it because it might be too painful, and let their imagination speak as like what would that be, and it almost like take them to a trip. I think like I'm really into creativity, and sometimes like all I end up doing is consuming a lot of content that it's about science, but I think listening to people's creative paths that they have not unlocked, mostly from strangers, like sitting down in New York at a bench and hearing like somebody's random story. I love that part. I love like getting closer to human beings. And also helps me because I'm so passionate about product. So like understanding people's needs, and for me, it's something I am addicted to, like those psychological stories, perhaps.
Yeah,
but health
that's
is yeah, I'm not sure how it will be framed, but definitely like I know like I'll subscribe to it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I never thought about that because if you're looking through the lens of what could I create that would help people, you do need to kind of eavesdrop. You need to listen in to what are people complaining about, right? Like let's hear the complaints because that's where you're going to find the problems.
Yeah, well, people, I think sometimes like it's a hobby complaining. So, it's therapeutical, like
Yes.
let it go and then. But no, Kate, like why I say imagination, because I was at a conference about like climate and all that, and it was this panel roundtable about sustainability, and I raised the question saying like, hey, like throughout media and movies, we all know the worst case scenario. Like we all know that if we don't change our like routines and our mindset about this, it's not gonna get better. And we have all these apocalyptic movies and everything. But we don't have examples that if we do things right, how that will look like, right? And for me, it's like it's almost like there is this inner school of thought. It's sitting in everybody's brains that it's taken only from a negative perspective. I will react, not from a good one. And I know that there's also this psychological parameter that says that people cannot have what they cannot envision. So if you don't plant those dreams, what are they fighting for? Just like to avoid worst case scenario. And I think like even in education, it's kind of like it's more from the avoidant part versus like fighting for a dream. So you're taught and teach to fight for your own dreams, but what about for a common dream and how that looks like? So that's why for me imagination was like, well, we need a positive imagination about things. Like if I do this right, oh my god, it's gonna look like blooming and everything, it's gonna look amazing. So those are the stories maybe like I'm missing, like the positive side of things if people do things right rather than the negative if they don't.
Oh, that's so interesting because I literally listened to a podcast this morning, and it was about how to get someone in your life to do what you want them to do. Okay. And it was kind of like, let's say, you have a child who doesn't clean their room. Like, what are some of the psychological hacks that could get them to do that? And the one thing this person said, it's actually Mel Robbins, she's a very famous podcaster. Yeah. I love her. She was on Tonight for. But the person she was interviewing said that we are propelled by what we're going to get out of a situation versus what is keeping us from doing something. So very often you tell a child, if you don't clean your room, it's going to be messy and you're not going to enjoy living like this. And it's going to, you're going to have rats, or you tell them something negative, right? That is absolutely not the way to get someone to do something. You instead tell them what they're going to add to their life, what is additive, which is exactly what you were just saying. Like, let's focus not on, let's not be fear-based. We're doing something because we don't want this to happen. Let's be dream-based. Let's do something because a beautiful idea is pulling us towards it. What are we going to get out of the situation? Because that is going to really pull us towards it. It's a much more powerful idea.
Yeah. I would love to see that. And still, like, I feel like it's missing, but I'm sure like one day maybe I'll be surprised. Now, Kate, I'm really curious because I feel like I've known you for ages for only having talked to you 30 minutes, which is beautiful. And it's really like pleasant. There is in now your career moments where you were like, okay, this is not what I signed up for. Yes. What were exactly those moments in journalism that you were like, what is this?
Oh, Anna, how long do you have, my friend? There have been many moments like that.
Yeah.
I will tell you the easiest moments to handle are when the work gets difficult. Like you're at a forest fire and you're on day 3 of doing live coverage from every hour, and you're like, this is really arduous. Even though you would think those would be the hardest moments of your career, they're not. You can power through a lot of things when it has to do with the work. I think the most difficult parts of any career, and I'd love to hear people's perspectives because I'm sure most people will either agree with me or they will disagree with me. I think dealing with other coworkers, dealing with the minutia of handling competitiveness. Television news is extremely competitive, and the higher up you go, it just gets even more competitive. I think dealing with, the environment where you're working, for me, has always been very, very difficult. I've had to deal with, whether it's harassment, whether it is, dismissive behavior from either a boss or a coworker. I'm trying to be as specific and truthful with this question without actually throwing anyone under the bus. Because one of the things I've learned when you have things that anger you or things that have happened to you is the greatest revenge is to move on, to acknowledge it, to learn from it, and then to find a better way, right? To rise above it and to not let someone's ugliness steal your light. That would be that has taken me a career to learn,
That is a very bravery act because I think sometimes we dismiss that it's our responsibility if we want to be better towards those people that we love. We need to protect that light. And yes. From this conversation and looking into your eyes, I can tell that you have not lost it, and it sparks in there.
Thank you.
But it's very, very difficult task to keep it, and not everybody has the power or resources, sometimes mental resources mostly, right, to be able to stay strong. And maybe even with social media right now, it's like people like right now are more fragile than ever. Like their character and their whole structure like crumbles so easily. And this is one of the things that worries me the most about this new generations, when they're so exposed to social media and criticism. But when it gets to the level that you're sharing, Kate, I'm sure like that must have been so hard. And I'm so happy that you've not stopped, and that was not a turning point in your career where you said like, I'm not going to do this anymore. Because so thank you for that. Thank you for,
it will, and I think it's going to surprise people that it's not the work that is the hard part, but it's it's always personal relationships. Human relationships are the hardest for anyone, I think. But I also think like being in local news where you're dealing with such tragedy and such heartache and such personal stakes, and seeing that every day has the ability to really affect someone's mental health and their outlook on life. And I think what I just said about, not letting someone dim your light, you have to have an inner reserve to be able to work in news and to still believe and still have hope and still be kind, because that just the work itself can affect you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So now, like, if I have to make the question in reverse, and basically making you remember a particular moment where you're like, my goodness, I absolutely love what I'm doing more than ever. Like, what was that moment? What was maybe that conversation or that subject, or, even like throughout like the recent conversations you've had perhaps, but that sparked in you and made you remember how good you are at and how much you love this?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think first and foremost, when I had the idea for To Dine For, I didn't know if it would work. It was just an idea, just like I'm sure you've had many business ideas, right? And there is something very special about seeing it come to life. And of course, it's not lost on me that I'm interviewing people who have brought ideas to life while the show itself is an idea of mine come to life, right? It's like,
Right.
and for me, like that very first episode that I did with Howard Schultz of Starbucks, the veteran CEO and the person who really took the idea and made it what it is today, created it into this global behemoth, brought Starbucks into Asia, which is the biggest tea drinking area of our world, and made them coffee drinkers. I mean, everything that he's done with that brand is a testament to his vision, his humanity, his leadership, his ability to propel people forward with true CEO leadership status. I was fired up before I interviewed him, and then I left that interview even more fired up, because to me, he was such a great example of the show come to life. He took me to a Middle Eastern restaurant in Seattle, Washington, that was a mom and pop restaurant of just great people with delicious food, very simple, very humble. And Mom Noon was absolutely wonderful. And to have him, you talk about being marinating in the energy of real greatness, is basically what I've been able to do over the past 5 to 6 years. And to me, he stands shoulders above so many people in his leadership skills, and everything that he demonstrated to me during that conversation, his ability, we were supposed to talk for 40 minutes. We talked for an hour and a half. You could tell he would keep talking if we wanted. And he had 1,000 other things to do, right? Except, he really was so generous of his time. We walked across to the Starbucks roastery, and he was so passionate about the coffee, even after all these years. And to see the crew there, to see the crew all set up, that I had hired the crew. We had the executive producer, the director of photography. This was, literally it was just an idea. And then to have everyone there and to actually create the show, I would say that was one of those memories for me that I knew, I absolutely wanted to do the show. My hunch was right, and I didn't know where it would go, but I knew it was on the right track.
From all these dinings that you've had, Kate, I mean, because I invite everybody to watch the series. Like I personally just recently got hooked up, and the thing, I'm not sure if you heard that. It's like Siri just popped up with a message. Like I absolutely hate it when he's like, but but just like for like a little gift here for the audience and for myself as curious as I'm gonna walk. What were the best takeaways? Just like summarizing here, like from all these conversations that you've taken from people that still echoes in your mind, that like, oh, that was like kind of something I learned and it transformed me, that interview, and like maybe not as deep, but it can like, some quotes here and there, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's really good. I wish I could say there was like a list of 10, but the truth is there's a list of 200. There is, every person has something unique. And I think my goal when I have a conversation with that person is not just to tell their story and allow them to tell their story, create an environment where they can share their own story, but it is in a short amount of time to capture their essence. Now, that's very different than telling their story. Capturing someone's essence is harder, and it is really why they do what they do and what they're all about. And it sounds like, oh, how do you capture someone's essence? But you can do it if you ask the right questions. And I will say, with that goal, what comes out of the guest really shocks me, because that's where they really reveal themselves, not only what they created, how they created it, why they created it, but who they are at their very core. And it's who somebody is at their very core that really has the power to change the world. And I would, one of the things that I like to do is obviously find out why they love to eat at that restaurant, but really get to the heart of their motivation. Like why are they doing what they're doing? And I recently interviewed Bozoma St. John, who is a marketing executive here in the United States. She is originally from Ghana. She came to the US when she was, I want to say like 12. That sounds right. She moved to Colorado first, and then she ended up going to college in Connecticut and working in New York City. But she has more presence than certainly anyone I've ever met. I mean, she is just a master class in owning who you are, telling your story, and really embodying yourself, which sounds crazy. Embody yourself. There is no pretenses about her, but then you get the sense that this woman is wholly herself. And so like I put her up as an example to say, how can, no one can be Bozoma St. John, but maybe you could be a little bit more yourself. And what would that look like? What would you say? Maybe you would speak up more. Maybe you would say less. What would that look like? And how do you move through the world? And is it a direct reflection of all that you believe? And that's a really interesting question, right? Like, how am I moving through the world? And does it embody who I am? That's a really big question. And I see that again and again with these guests, is they are truly taking up space and embodying who they are, because that leads to the greatest success.
I've taken so much of your time, and like I wanted to extend this with question, and you just answered the next one, which was literally about what will be that question that you think it should be present in every single conversation, right? No matter how it is, right? And if anybody who is doing a podcast or has the chance to bring to light something, no matter what the subject is, what will be that question that everybody should make to somebody, right? And
I have an answer for this. It is something that I want everyone listening to realize this question is for anyone. It's for anyone in business. it's not for somebody, not necessarily for someone being interviewed. It's for you yourself. And that is this. The question is, if you are not in the room, what do you want people to say about you? What would you want people to be saying about you? Because the answer to that is something you should live every day. The answer, and it's not about what, it's so important what others think of us. No, that's not the,
No.
that's not the exercise. The exercise is what do you hope that someone would say about you? Because you should be living that every day, and that should be a North Star for you and a great place to quote unquote find yourself and to be, because it'll reveal a lot. And a question that I ask my guests is, I say, what do you want your legacy to be? Or when someone hears the name Kate Sullivan, what do you want them to think? Which is, they're slightly different versions of the same question, but it gets you thinking about, our time on Earth is limited, it is brief, and we should get about the business of doing and being exactly who we are, what we believe, and what we value.
Very, very. It's not about what people believe, but and dismissing what their interpretation of you might be, just like making sure that being how wants to present itself. Very, very interesting, Kate. Like, I think you've resonated a lot of questions here that you've mentioned here, a lot of things that it will resonate with the audience about their truthfulness, because that's what journalism in the end is. And it doesn't matter if it comes out through a conversation or explaining what's happening in a situation that the world deserves to know, but like what truth is, no matter the angles of it or the interpretations, because everybody has, we're such a diverse world right now.
Yes.
So, Kate, I gotta say, this has been, it might happen that it happened with everybody, that it could go as long as one can take much time from you, because you have that magic. And I think one of the things I was most keen to get out of this conversation was mostly like, understanding the person that always is making the questions. But to make like a final line, for me, I'm really very passionate about people that make the right questions, not necessarily the ones that think have the right answers. And that for me is the most difficult thing in life, to have the right questions. And I think like it also defines me as a person, the things that I ask myself or I ask others. So expanding that list of questions, it's something that I learn from you, like watching you, how you navigate conversations with people and everything, because it enriches one's life. As you said, it's short, it's not forever. And if you make the right question, can be like, life-changing. So
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Anna. I've enjoyed it as well. Cheers to you and continued success. I will be watching from afar.
And I hope also from close. We wait for you in Barcelona.